And now it gives me great pleasure in introducing today's presenter. Bob Bogash has been a volunteer at the Museum of Flight since its inception in 1965. He is a retired Boeing career employee, serving in myriad jobs over more than 30 years, including engineering, manufacturing, customer service support, flight test, product development, sales, marketing, purchasing, and quality assurance. He served as Boeing field rep for over 10 years with worldwide assignments. When he retired, he was director of quality assurance for the material division, responsible for more than 1 billion parts that flow into Boeing each year from about 3,600 suppliers. Over the years, Bob has managed the acquisition of approximately 15 of the museum's major aircraft, including purchase, transportation, refurb, and in many cases, restoration of flight status. These include aircraft such as the prototype 727, 737, 747 airplanes, Lockheed Electra, F-104, and Constellation, Concorde, and B-52. Bob is active in every area of aviation, has been a licensed pilot since 1964, and built his own Vans RV-12 airplane. He uses the airplane extensively for his many museum activities and has flown it over 700 hours in the past 6 years into over 100 airports. Please help me in welcoming Bob Bogash. Thank you.
I better sit down. I hate when they do that. I'm wearing a hat. TC is wearing one too, It says team, and this is what it took to do this project, and all of them are as a team. So if I say I or we or whatever, I'm referring to a whole lot of people. And one of the things that has been real obvious in my life is every time sort of like in The Sound of Music, every time I hit a brick wall, the door opens, and some great person comes walking through to help me just at the right time. So I want to thank all of you personally for coming to this. It's you have other things to do on a Saturday, I know, and thank goodness it's not a Husky home game today, or they're just me and Dot, but and even the home game, or even today's game is not at this time. I'm going to be telling a story of quite an epic restoration, one that allowed a historic old airplane to taste the skies once more. I'll also be talking about some of the magic and so-called, I emphasize so-called inanimate objects, man-made machines with which we share life. Like animals, like, say, dogs or horses, our non-human companions work alongside us and are dependent upon us for their care and feeding. With airplanes, I especially like the man-horse analogy. A thoroughbred with their trainer and their jockey and their grooms, an airplane with its cleaners and mechanics and pilots. Neither is complete without the other. I'd also like for you to ponder the miracle of flight that still resides in the machines you see in this great museum. They may have been retired, but the spark is still present. And I'll show how that spark can be brought to life again. I'll be introducing ghosts as I go along from her past and invite you to become an honored ghost as well. Unfortunately, I have a ton of slides, as everybody who has ever seen me knows. 5 pounds isn't enough in a 5-pound sack for me. It's more like 25 pounds. It's a gene defect for which I apologize, but I cut mercilessly through all my slides to try and keep it down to a dull roar, but I can never do that, so what I did is I left them all in. And depending on the timing, if it looks like I'm going over too badly, I'll just fast forward through a bunch of those, and then you can come up and grab me after. Because most all of them have a story that goes with them, and I love to tell stories. Meanwhile, I'm going to tell the ushers to lock the back doors. I hope everybody has been to the bathroom, and I'm going to turn on the gas. So, with that, beautiful airplane, sleeping for 25 years, went from what you see there on the upper left to what you see there in the lower right. My friend Peter Morton, who is a councilman up on Whidbey Island, good friend, and he couldn't make it today because they have some kind of emergency preparedness, something or other drill. But he sent out something to a bunch of his pals saying that, encouraging them to come on down and see Bob, and said Bob is always entertaining, obstreperous, informative, and penetrating in his presentation. I didn't know whether that was good or bad, so I looked up obstreperous. And he emphasized out of control, and I didn't know whether to like that or not, but when I thought about it, I said, yeah, I guess so. Now, I've asked this in a couple others, but, does everybody know what that means? Does anybody know what it means? It's what, yeah, somebody said it, If you're an aviation person, you don't know what this means, 3 demerits and go stand in the corner. That's what negative Ghost Rider, the pattern is full, is about. I hope you guys will remember that in the future. So normal people, and I don't count myself as one, not even sure I'm a person, but maybe I'm really an airplane in disguise. But if they like airplanes or anything else, what they do is they collect pictures and posters or books or models. But I like the real thing, and so models are far too small for me. Now there's a video here which I am not going to play, but you can find it on my website, and it talks about some of those things. Now, Matt Hayes, are you here today by any chance? No? Let's see, Bruce Beadle, are you here today? Okay, I need to know who's here and who's not here, because I'm going to badmouth them, and I want to make sure. And of course, Matt is used to my souls and ghosts stuff, because that's what I maintain, is that airplanes are living things and that they have souls, and anybody who's ever worked on one, flown one, or whatever knows that. And a good example we saw just up in July, we flew into Friday Harbor, where we go all the time for lunch, and there was this C-47 sitting there. It had just returned from Normandy, where it participated in the 75th anniversary. And that particular airplane actually flew missions on D-Day, and it was actually the airplane that dropped paratroopers over Saint-Mary-Glace, which is a famous French town with a church where, if you've seen The Longest Day, they talk about it, and Red Buttons comes down and lands in the church steeple. So just think, and that they have a parachutist on that church steeple to this day. Just think of the stories that airplane could tell. And then there's the ghosts of the people, of course, who are associated with these airplanes. They're the people who designed and built and flew, maintained, and actually were passengers on these airplanes. So my job is, as a retiree, people ask what I do for in my retirement. My wife says, he flunked retirement. But is I run an animal sanctuary for airplanes, and with a no-kill policy. So one of the things that I have been talking about is anthropomorphizing, and that is to attribute human form or personality to things that are not human. Well, we all do that, with our dogs and cats or whatever, and we do it with machines like with 737, and of course, most. You don't see many boats that don't have a name. Most of them are female in gender. And we refer to airplanes, boats, and whatever and usually in the feminine for whatever reason. I'll leave that up to you. But one thing I'd like to ask everybody here is, when you go around and look at these airplanes in the museum here, or any other museum for that matter, I think, I've watched a lot of people going around. They look at it and it's interesting, whatever, but what I like to think about is the fact that that machine, and in this case I'm looking at the Blackbird, actually flew 20 miles above the Earth, over 2,000 miles an hour. I mean, that one that you're looking at. And more than that, I like to think also about the fact that that thing could actually do it again. You know, all of that stuff you see there is not paper mache or whatever. It's a real airplane. If you put the right gas in and the rest of that thing, it could do it again. Now, does anybody here ever watch Antiques Roadshow? It's on PBS. My wife and I watch an obscene amount of it. People bring in old things. And one day we were sitting there watching, and this lady came in, and she had this banjo in a case. And the appraiser looked at it and gave her the story behind it and how much it was worth or whatever. And then he asked, how did you come by this thing? And she said, well, it was, we were cleaning out the attic of my grandparents' place, and it was in the attic. It might have been my grandfather's or maybe my great-grandfather's. They figured it had been up there for 80 years maybe. And he said, wow, that's interesting. He said, did you play it? Oh, no, I don't know how to play. Did anybody play it? No. Would you like to hear it played? She said, sure. So he took it out of the case without tuning or whatever and started playing it. Now, banjo, ding, 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 makes a big sound and whatever. And I jumped up and, which I do sometimes, even at home, and I told my wife, that's it. That's why I do what I do. Because, you see, that banjo had sat for 80 years in that case in the attic, and it had all that music locked up in it. And it hadn't been let out. But it was there just the same. And I said, that's what I do with my airplanes. And that's the story that we're going to talk about today. You know, one example here that I trotted out here was a locomotive called Big Boy. I don't know if anybody has looked into this. I'm as big a train fan as I am an airplane fan. And a lot of my train pals are airplane pals and vice versa. And I often wonder why. Well, it's easy because locomotives are just like airplanes. They're big. They move under their own power. They can go fast, they go to faraway places, and they make a lot of noise, you know, so what else could you want? This locomotive is the largest locomotive in the world, weighs 1.25 million pounds, believe it or not. And when it was built in 1941 to haul heavy freights over the Rockies for Union Pacific, and when they retired it, they gave it to the city of Pomona in California, who put it in a park. And it sat there for 59 years until UP came back and said, can we have our locomotive back? We want to put it in service again, which they did about 3 years ago. They took it away. It was nowhere near a railroad, so they had to build, as you see, a temporary railroad across the countryside to get it to where they could haul it back up to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and now that locomotive is back in service. They did that for the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was back in May, I think. And everywhere it goes, it's drawing big crowds. It's going on a countrywide tour, and I can't wait till it comes here. It's going to Las Vegas today, actually. I checked it out. If you don't save them, what happens? Well, here's a 757 that Boeing bought secondhand and used this for something called an echo demonstrator. They were fooling around with environmental stuff, and they flew it for a year. And they were very proud of it, but then they flew it over to Moses Lake, and that's what happens to old airplanes. They become beer cans. So to keep this from happening, you know, as mentioned by Emily, you know, I've worked a lot of airplanes here at the museum and elsewhere, and with about 15 filled up here, now when I come around, Matt's not here, but they all run and hide in the men's room. And so I have to go around banging on stall doors because they're figuring out I've found another airplane for them. So I put about 10 in other places, and I have another 8 working now. And this one is the last. In May 15th, it opened at the JFK, has a new airport hotel there, and it's parked in front. And this airplane was very much close to becoming a beer can, I can tell you. So I'm going to show you just a few pictures, but one of these is, as you look at these, look at the airplane. Don't look at the people, because the airplane is the one constant in all of these, you see. all of these ghosts that I talk about, many of whom come and gone, have played a part in the life of this machine, and they don't even know each other. And there's the flight crew for the last trip, and the mechanics who pushed it out on the last trip. And then after we got it down here to Boeing Field, there's the people climbing on the airplane. They all are the ghosts. Now, the 727 story began in 1947 when Boeing designed and built the B-47, and which basically is the matriarch for all large jet airplanes since. It solved all the problems of a large multi-engine swept-wing jet airplane. Eventually, it led to the B-52 and then the Dash 80, which became the 707. It was competing at the time against the de Havilland Comet. We have one of those. In fact, that's our airplane up at Payne Field that had come out earlier. 707. People don't realize, but in the early days, jet travel, people didn't know whether people would fly on jets. They thought maybe that just the jet set would, people, first class, expensive tickets, all the rest of that. But having flown in a jet, nobody would go back to a piston airplane, just like you won't go back to a black and white TV set after you've seen a color set. So there were other airplanes that were in the marketplace. The Sud Caravel was one. It actually made its first flight in 1956, and the Brits had the Trident, and Boeing came up with a trijet of their own called the 727, and the engineering drawings for it. They tested the side-mounted engines on the 707 prototype, the Dash 80, and then in 1962 they began construction. And here's our airplane and our airplane's wings in the Renton plant. And here she is the day before she rolled out. You can see the dais there in the lower part. We're getting all set for the festivities the next day. Now the airlines who had bought the airplane sent representatives to Boeing for the rollout, and in this case they sent flight attendants, stewardesses maybe in those days. In the center of the picture there's a gal, a real cute gal, named Julie Aries. She's in the light uniform. She represented United Airlines. Now, I keep talking about ghosts, and I'm not just spinning my wheels because Julie is here, right there. Julie, stand up. And her son Mark next to her, and he flies for Alaska Airlines. So there are. This ghost business is not just a bunch of bogash BS. There are ghosts out there, and some of them are still around. Here's a whole bunch more that celebrated the actual rollout, and which made a lot of PR at the time in Aviation Week. Designed for low speeds. The 727 was called the LaGuardia airplane because it was designed to fly in and out of LaGuardia Airport in New York, which at the time had two 5,000-foot runways. Now they're 7,000 feet, and I hear pilots bitching about how they're too short, but for a long time they were 5,000 feet. And the reason that it was able to do that because Boeing designed a sophisticated high-lift system comprised of leading-edge slats and flaps and triple-slotted trailing-edge flaps. And that whole system went on to the 737 and then later the 747. The airplane, after the rollout, went up on the flight line. Scott Carson, this is one of his pictures, and this is also one of his pictures. And did some high-speed taxi tests at Renton where they raised the nose off the ground. And then finally, in the early morning hours of February 9th, 1963, the airplane sat on the flight line ready for its first flight, crewed by Lou Wallach in the left seat, Dix Lesh on the right, and Shuli Schulenberger was the flight engineer. All have passed now. Lou's wife, Sarah, came today, and Sarah, why don't you raise your hand? James Raisbeck, these are his personal pictures. Here's the airplane taxiing out at Renton the north end. If you look real closely in the background, you can see a Connie. That's the PNA, Connie Pacific Northern, that Boeing used to rent for using for in-flight photo sessions. The airplane taxied down to the south end, did a 180, and took off to the north on its first flight. Now these are all our airplane, the airplane that's sitting across the street. And you can see there, that's one heck of a good-looking flying machine. There's Lou and Dick Slesh. They're real happy after the airplane landed up at Payne Field on its first landing, and there they are with Bill Allen, longtime Boeing president. If you look real close, you can see that Bill looks like he hasn't been breathing in about 4 hours, and he hasn't let it out yet. Interesting here is one of the first ads, meet America's first short-range jetliner, because at the time, 727 was viewed as a short-range airplane, later became more like a medium-range airplane. My path crossed with the E1, which is what we call it in Boeing nomenclature. N7001 uniform is the tail number. Back in September 1963, and that's the airplane in the flight center, and there I am. This is in front of E3, the third airplane. Hard to believe, but I used to be skinny and had dark hair, complete with a skinny tie. And all three historic airplanes there, our airplanes in the middle, the second one, E2, is in the back, Dash 80 in the front. We did, of course, all the flight testing, and one of the things we did is we proved out the airplane for D.B. Cooper, so we proved that you could drop stuff out of the aft air stairs. Airplane went on to be a very successful airplane. 707 sold about 950 airplanes. 727 sold 1,832 twice. And that's the firing order and the deliveries over a 20-year span. One of the interesting ads that I dug out was this one here, which proves that Airbus has stolen everything from Boeing, including their name. World's best-selling Airbus. The last airplane, number 1832, was rolled out in 1984. It was a FedEx freighter, and that airplane is still in service, by the way. And so now moving on to E1, our airplane, which was very unusual because it actually got delivered to an airline. Boeing basically kept all the number one airplanes because it was too difficult to convert them into a certified configuration. And as I'll get into, this airplane, it was a prototype its whole life. It was very unique. It flew with United over those years and carried about 3 million people. And as you can see here, they took it on a tour, be it known that the bearer of the certificate was a guest on the first Boeing 727 jet flight demonstration. The airplane had 3 color schemes or liveries. That's the first one, and the second, and the third. When we got it from United, they repainted it into their original color scheme. At some point, it got christened the Spirit of Seattle. Everybody wanted to get their picture taken in front of it because everybody knew that this was the first airplane. In fact, if you climb all over this airplane, especially in the cockpit, I guess pilots don't have a lot to do, but anyway, there's graffiti in every nook and cranny all over this airplane as people carved their initials in. 1984, I flew into O'Hare in Chicago one day, and I saw the airplane, and I thought ran across my mind that this airplane was destined to be scrapped in the desert. So I went to see the head people at United and said, could you give me the airplane? At the time, I was the head of the collections committee for the museum, and which I'm still a member, and they said yes on retirement. And so in January 1991, the airplane was retired, and it flew a revenue flight, 838, from San Francisco to Seattle. That's a picture inside on that last revenue flight, under the command of 3 guys who all bid system-wide for the opportunity. And the guy in the middle, a real go-getter, was the captain. His name was Jimmy Carter. When Jimmy Carter, the president, was running for president, he rented an airplane off United for his campaign trips, and flying it was Jimmy Carter. So the press had a real field day with Jimmy Carter flying Jimmy Carter. I talked to Captain Jimmy Carter a number of times and down in Florida. He has since passed, but airplane flew into SeaTac, ferried over to Boeing Field for an acceptance, and then made its last flight, except wasn't its last flight, was it? But it almost was. Up to Everett. That's because the museum as it exists now didn't exist then, and there was no place for this airplane. So you got a boarding pass from Seattle to Everett, and on the way up there was two guys flying in it. On the right is Lou Wallach, and on the left is Dick Slesh. And Sarah, boy, Lou is a good-looking stud, and a test pilot too. My God, But I could see where he'd attract the ladies. But in any event, look at the seats on that, if you would, for a minute, because I keep talking about the airplane and the continuity. Here's the same airplane, same seats, same red seats. This is taken 25 years later. That's my wife, Dot, one of the ghosts, and T.C. Howard in February of 2016 when we did the first taxi tests, and I was privileged to get the airplane moving under its own power for the first time in 25 years. So the airplane arrived up at Payne Field. It had 64,000 hours and 48,000 flights, and Tom Emmerich, this proves that there are at least a few airline pilots who don't fly with their feet flat on the floor. Pilots would understand that, Airline pilots are reputed to have lazy feet, but somebody wore out the rudder pedals on that thing. One of the things that they did was United cut a deal with the museum, and they sent in this crew of mechanics who spent 3 weeks taking off everything that was of use on the airplane. So it wasn't clear to me how the museum intended to move the airplane eventually back down to Boeing Field with no parts, but that's what the rest of the story is about. 1995, I retired from Boeing, and I put up a web page. The internet was brand new, and a guy responded, Steve Huemler, passed last year, was a United mechanic working night shift at SeaTac, and he helped me restore this airplane along with a lot of others, and also the 737, and I couldn't have done any of it without him. He connected me with United. They have a company newspaper down there, and so we had a lot of United people coming up from time to time, and eventually we flew down. He got us 2 passes. We flew down to the overhaul base in San Francisco, and we tried to get our parts back, which we found were in a warehouse in Burlingame, California. We didn't exactly succeed at that, but we did open a spigot where some parts started flowing north, mostly parts that had failed going through overhaul, but in any event might be good for one last flight. One of the things Steve did is he got me an audience with the CEO of United Airlines. And actually, by the time this was all over, I had met with 5 CEOs of United Airlines who they were changing CEOs sort of like maybe Boeing does. And so what the hope was that we could get another airplane to act as a parts queen. When 911 happened, United had 75 727s, and they parked them all in Victorville, California. I tried to get one of those, and they finally agreed, and we were going to fly it up here and do a parts swap. But then United went bankrupt, and suddenly I was dealing with a bankruptcy court judge in Chicago, and that all fell through. So for 10 years, me and Steve were kind of by ourselves, fooling around. We sat under the airplane and made humming noises like if the engines were running. And meanwhile, the airplane continued to deteriorate. Just sitting outside, this is what happens to an airplane. And in this case, this is the skin sections in the back end where actually you had corrosion in the skin lap joints that created enough pressure between the skins to actually pop the rivets out. The airplane started to look pretty sad. We We had some wash parties, but they weren't enough. At this point, a lot of people thought that this airplane would never fly again, and maybe never go down to the museum even. And we were starting to make maybe alternate arrangements. And even the crew of guys that we had were getting pretty down. The inside was getting worn out because there were a lot of people who were coming to visit, and everybody wanted to sit in the left seat, including Lou, who came up a few times and was on our team, and his daughter Becky, who lives in Idaho. Finally, with no United, I needed another airplane, so I started working with FedEx. FedEx had a large 727 fleet, and they were being overhauled in Payne Field. And they offered me 2 airplanes, and went over and looked at them, and they were in worse shape than ours. These airplanes were going through overhaul and they were deemed uneconomic to continue the overhaul, and so they were retired on the spot. Finally, in 2004, they called me up on a Friday and said, we have another one, N124FE. Marcella was her name. They're named after employees' kids at FedEx. And did I want that one? So I went over there on a Friday afternoon and looked at the airplane, and it had all the hardware we wanted. Didn't have the engines or APU, but had the rest. So the next morning, Saturday morning, me and Tom Cathcart got in the museum's tug, got a tow bar, drove over. The airplane was sitting outside on the ramp, hooked up the tow bar, and dragged the airplane away. And kind of that's the way it is. You know, there's never been a piece of paper that's transferred hands from that day till now. And if I had a lot of time, I'd tell you some really interesting stories about that. Because I was trying to track parts through FedEx, and I said, I need some records for N124FE, and they said, N124FE is a 767. See, they had recycled the tail numbers. And what are you talking about? There's no 727. And I said, well, there used to be. Boeing wanted, the original plan was to put it on the Boeing ramp. Boeing wanted $22,000 a month. The airport wanted about $2,000 a month to park on the south ramp, and cut a deal with the Everett Community College and put it on their hard stand for 2 years while we got the parts, and they didn't charge nothing, you know, sort of like the Woody Guthrie song, you know, the sign said no trespassing, and on the back it didn't say nothing. So at this point, T.C. Howard, stand up, T.C., who became the crew chief. Come on, you can make it. Came on board and was one of my saviors. And you'll see a lot about TC along the way here. But he was the guy who came up every day and kicked the tires and made sure things were going to happen. And here he is working on the airplane. So we started taking all the hardware off. This is the trailing edge jack screws, flap jack screws, and transmissions, and the leading edge slat actuators. Here's a support fitting that we harvested that was all corroded out of our airplane. We took all of the wheels off of FedEx, off Marcella, because this airplane had already been sitting at that point but for about 14 years. And there's Steve Huemler. And we did 12 wheel changes in 2 days, which is quite a bit, considering these airplanes weren't even side by side. The crew who did that, TC on the left, myself, Jim Munike, who I'm going to talk about later, and Dave Capitalupo on the far right, who I'm also going to talk about later. And so that was, after we got to get all the hardware off, that was the end of Marcella, kind of. Decided to save 2 pieces from Marcella. One was the forward fuselage, which I gave to the Future of Flight Museum on the northwest corner of Payne Field, the Boeing Tour Center, where it sat for 14 years until, and it was painted by Boeing in Eastern colors, because that airplane was originally an Eastern airplane. And until last year, when the Future of Flight Museum closed, and then Boeing, who took it over, said, get all that stuff out of here. And museum had a lot of stuff there, and the museum said, Bob, come get your airplane stuff. And I had this in a Air 727 cockpit there, which suddenly became mine. You know, if I had driven off with it, it would have been theirs. Sort of like my dogs operates, you know, the mine theory, you know, what's mine is mine and what yours is mine. And so I wound up taking that over to Moses Lake, where it is now. So if anybody wants that, you know, I can make you a hot deal. Make a good restaurant or whatever. And actually, it might wind up in Miami at an Eastern museum that I'm working on down there at this time. The other thing we took off was the horizontal stabilizer, because we'd fooled around with our airplane enough to know that we had problems there. And poor Marcella, she wound up looking like a Thanksgiving turkey 3 days after Thanksgiving, you know, picked clean. At that point, we had a new wrinkle appeared, and that was the museum cut a deal with American, and they flew in a retired 727-200 that was going to act as the placeholder for the prototype that was up north. Someday we were going to bring it down here and get rid of the American. American is still here, and John Delapina is here. He came up from San Francisco, by the way. Raise your hand more there. Stand up, John. And, you know, we've been trying to get that to go to Kansas City for the last 3 years, and that's another, that would be tomorrow's pitch. But we did save that. That was going to be scrapped. It was within 8 hours of being scrapped. Equipment was on site and everything. We were going to, gone. Managed to save that airplane, but, you know, who knows where she's going to be. The reason this is a problem for me is because people at the museum started saying, why are we going to spend all this money, time and money to bring this airplane down from Everett when we already have a 727? And in fact, some people went so far as to say, nobody will know the difference. Believe me, people on the board said that, some of them. I got an authorization to fly the airplane finally after a lot of backdoor politicking, but on July 2nd, 2014, I went to a meeting up at Payne Field in Everett, and they gave out a handout, and the handout included this memo. It seems the museum had asked Boeing, hadn't told me, but had asked Boeing to come in and look over the airplane, because here I am standing up saying, hey, yeah, we can fly it, and we can fly it, no problem. And this letter says 3 things. The first thing says that we looked at it, and we need to look at it a lot more. So we need to send in a survey team. If you want us to do that, it's going to cost you $450K, and you have to strip the interior before our guys show up on scene, which would be really a lot of fun with just a bunch of volunteers. And the second part of it says if they deem it to be airworthy, then we think it'll cost at least $2 million and maybe as much as $6 million to get it airworthy to fly down to Boeing Field. And that doesn't include the engines, by the way. And then the third paragraph says, paragraphs 1 and 2 notwithstanding, we don't recommend that this airplane ever be flown again. So here's the museum. They're sitting with this piece of paper from the great Boeing company, all their engineers and mechanics and the rest of that, saying, never fly this airplane again. And they're sitting with me, Bob Schnook, saying, you know, I can do it. I can fly this airplane again safely. And I've done it many times. I've been doing this my whole life. And that's just what I did with the 737, except it was in Moses Lake, and we made a last flight over. The memo from the meeting, the board of director meeting minutes here says their estimate of putting the aircraft in flying condition is very high. It was followed by a statement that Boeing wants no part of it. So Doug King, the CEO of the museum at the time, wrote a letter to the staff and volunteers saying, in light of this, you know, the airplane won't be flown. Well, in 2014, I already had 30 years into this project. So I wasn't a real happy camper. But in the end, working with a bunch of folks in the board, we were able to turn that around. Boeing in that memo throws around the word airworthy a lot. It's the wrong word. We're not trying to make this airplane airworthy. In order for it to be airworthy, it must be in compliance with its type design, and it must be in condition for safe operation. What we were trying to do is number 2, not number 1. Actually, when this airplane flew down here, it had 45 major systems that were inoperative, starting with the landing gear and the flaps and the center tank, no APU, no air conditioning and pressurization, on and on and on. Airplane was hardly in compliance with its type design. But in the end, so here's where we sat. Boeing estimated $450 plus the interior, 2 to 3 up to 6 for the repair. We went out and got an estimate to move it by surface, and I've moved a whole bunch of airplanes now by surface, and they're big jobs, and they're not easy. And the 727 is especially difficult because the tail doesn't come off like it does on a 07 or 37 or 47. You have to take the whole back end of the airplane off. They estimate it was for $450, take it apart, truck it, put it back together, like we did with the B-52. My approach to the board was, I can beat that, and we'll have a real airplane that flew in. I'll get right to the back page here on that, but it was, when we got all done, we had moved, we restored and flew the airplane down here for $241,000. And, we could have done it for about $40K, under 200, if some other things had happened that I didn't really have control over. So we were authorized to fly again. Now, one of the things, there's 3 elements I like to say about managing a project. They're responsibility, authority, and accountability. You're responsible for doing this job. Move this airplane down here. Here's your authority. I'm going to give you the funds, the manpower, and all the rest of this in order to get the job done. And I'm going to hold you accountable for this. Now, this is something that's woefully missing from a big aerospace company in Seattle these days. And some of it was missing when I was working, where the authority part was always missing. My boss used to come to me, Jim Blue, and he said, somewhere in the world, there's a man who can do this job, and I hope you're it. And I said, well, if you put it in those terms, I guess so. But, what you need is that. So I was given a budget for the first time in all my projects with the museum, $300K. And Bruce McCaw, one of the trustees, shoved another 100 in my back pocket and said, don't worry, if you I'll cover your back. And they gave me this piece of paper, which is a power of attorney, appointing me as the agent for the museum. So I often talk about my airplanes, but in this case, it was my airplane. So I like to say bucking rivets is the easy part. Ward, where are you, Ward? Was our lawyer. We arm wrestled every day. There were, I think, over 45 contracts over the fuel system and the repair agency and the engines and on, and it drove me crazy. But we're still friends, and argued a lot about the insurance, which cost $43,500 I had to spend for a 20-minute flight, unfortunately. I went out to 6 repair agencies, settled on one to come look at the airplane named SOAR down in Southern California, and they came in, did a really complete survey, and said, yeah, they thought the airplane could be restored for flight, and so we hired them. So the first thing we did is in the summer of 2015, is we repainted the airplane. And Guy Amico, are you here? Guy said he might make it up here from California. He's the guy who painted the airplane with 4 other guys. First thing, we washed and sanded it, masked it, and then began repainting. Looks a lot better. And we did it with paint rollers, which a lot of people really laugh at, but that's We've now a lot of airplanes get painted with paint rollers, and you can't tell the difference. And that's the way I'd paint my airplane now if I had to do it again. And we painted 3 airplanes that way with him: 747, B-52, and 727. And there's Guy with his 4 guys, and that's the airplane afterwards. Born again. FedEx, couldn't have done this job without FedEx, can't say enough about them. Well, Bob, look, it's got engines. Well, not exactly, because when you take the cowling off, that's what's inside. They gave us 5 engines. These were airworthy engines, worth 250 to 400K each. Trucked them up here for us, all for nothing, from Victorville, California, along with 5 transportation stands and 3 roll-around shop stands, which each worth 5 or 10K. And so we wound up with these 5 engines. You could say, why do you need 5 engines? Well, Tim Powell was the pilot. He's sitting right here. Another one of my ghosts. Stand up, Tim, so I don't have to make you do it later. Because Tim was afraid we'd lose an engine, so he wanted 5 engines. Actually, the reason is, and I may go into fast-forward mode here pretty quick, but because FedEx and Pratt & Whitney had worked out a deal, they had designed a hush kit for this airplane to make it Stage 3 noise compliant. And some people know what I'm talking about, and the rest can just forget about it. Those hush-kitted engines had a big geometry and weight difference between the regular engines and those, and we could not install them on our airplane. So what we did, they sent us, but the center engine on their hush-kitted airplane did not have all that stuff. So they sent us 3 center engines and 2 side engines. TC and his crew harvested the parts, the EBU, acronym time, engine buildup, the EBUs off the side engines, and installed them on the center engines to make 3 QECs, another one, quick engine change kit. So using all these parts, a lot of people don't realize if you have a 737, you have a spare engine, you can put it on either side. 727, all 3 engines are site-specific, and they're built up completely differently. Million parts, brackets, nuts, bolts, clamps, everything else. And TC figured this all out. Couldn't have done it without him. And eventually, and there he is in the back with Tom Cathcart, who just had a back operation, and he'd be here today, putting that together. And we wound up with 3 QECs, 1 for each position. In January of 2016, we had a kickoff meeting at the museum. Tom is right in the front. TC's in the light shirt there. And David Wittrig from SOAR is there. And all of the principals were there. We set out what we were going to do and our timetable for doing it. There's David and Ken Finister. These are the 2 guys who ran the SOAR operation. Ken sadly passed about a year after we had done this. But if this had been a Boeing AOG team, believe me, it would have been what, 20, 30, 40 people? They came forward with this proposal. It was very cost effective, and they proposed having 6 people, 4 mechanics, and these 2 guys who are both player coaches. And so they did all the work along. I was very nervous about that 6 people could do it, but they did. Myself, I put together at that meeting a deal which was all the action items for doing this and all our problems and all the things that we couldn't get done. And I published all this. Everything that we did, I published on the web. And so Alan Mullally, had this saying, working together. We worked together with the world. I had 7 million people following the restoration online. I had one guy who sent me an email saying, I check in 20 times a day to see what you're doing. And open kimono is the Boeing word. Transparency, nothing was kept secret. Every problem we ran into, I put down there. And in a bunch of cases, and 3, if I have time, I'll tell you about specifically, where somebody from left field came out, one of those God-sent people, and was able to solve a problem that I had, and when we were up against a stone wall. We made a configuration baseline. We're going to replace the stabilizer and elevators, fly gear down unpressurized with no center tank, no APU, no IFR. And then as we got into it, we also decided we'd fix the flaps at 15 and no reverse. Okay, Bob, what's going to work? Well, the flight controls and trim, all the electrics, hydraulics, air data, so we know how fast we're going and how high we are. The anti-skid, since we had no reverse, we decided we had to stop, and engine fire detection and extinguishing. After that meeting, there's the airplane with the 247, which made its last flight to museum about a month later. And we hooked up a tow bar and a tug and took it down to ATS, Aviation Technical Services at Payne Field. Towed it down the Bravo taxiway there. Very kind of a bittersweet moment, very excited but the airplane was leaving her home for 25 years, if you can imagine. And never to come back, or maybe to come back. Because, I had promised the museum, if we run into any showstoppers, we're going to bring it back. I'm going to truck it down. We're not going to do anything dumb. But hopefully that was the end. And she left behind her signature, which were big holes in the asphalt where she'd sat for 25 years. Took her over to ATS's hangar, where they were waiting with a nose lift dolly, which is a gadget you use to bring in airplanes where the tail is taller than the door. Quite common. And now the airplane, everything I'm saying is first time in 25 years. First time in 25 years this airplane was inside in a brightly lit hangar, warm. And here's all of the parts that TC had that were over in the museum hangar there. And that's me saying, how are we going to do this? I've told everybody I could do this. How are we going to do this? First thing, we got electrical power on, always a big event for every airplane. We actually put power on 3 or 4 times, as I call it. Ran around sniffing and listening for noises. We smelled smoke, we thought, 2 or 3 times. Eventually, we kept the power on. Here, these are the dash pilot's instrument panels with the lights on. As you can see, this is very much a steam gauge airplane. And lights on in the cabin, wingtip lights, etc. Then we started, we're going to change out the stabilizer. Here's Marcella's stabilizer. It's somehow serendipity I'd saved from 12 years before. And here's Ken with the guy pointing up at the, if you look at their faces and they're all looking up saying, up there? You mean you want us to go up there? And but yeah, and that turned out, I think, to be the biggest job we had. Probably was to swap the stabilizers. Took pretty near the whole time to get that ironed and set out of the way. Now, this is a picture of the #1 airplane stabilizer that I found in Renton in 1962. So we looked to see if this was maybe the same unit, and if you look real close, you see it's serial number 0001. It's in fact the first stabilizer, had never been changed. Up she goes and on. Now, ATS had promised 3 or 4 hours in the hangar, and we wound up with, I think, 8 or 11 days inside, which was really nice. I won't, going to run out of time here, except the doors are locked. But one of the reasons we had changed the stabilizers, I mean, the mechanisms and everything were all horribly corroded in the other stabilizer. What you see here is those are quadrants. There's cables, folks, that attach to that. This is a manual reversion airplane, as are the 07, 27, and 37. Those cables run to the pilot's wheel. So when the pilot pushes and pulls on the yoke, those quadrants turn and the elevators go up and down. No computers, no fly-by-wire, none of that stuff. This is the area that's below the cockpit floor. You see that? You see the bicycle chain there? That connects to the trim wheel, which is just above it on the pilot's aisle stand. He turns that trim wheel manually, and it turns that wheel, which turns that drum, which has all those cables wrapped around it. Those cables run down through the length of the airplane, underneath the floor, up the tail to another drum that's up on the stabilizer there. and it moves the stabilizer up and down. The stabilizer is hinged at the rear and moves up and down at the front. And it does that with normally 2 electric motors, but you can also use the manual trim wheel, and that's a subject that's everybody's an expert on now with the Max problems. Terrible weather we had at the time, elevator field computer that split its case at the end after we'd worked on it for all these weeks. I'll skip all that. Put the engines on, or thought we were going to, except they didn't fit, you see, because these hush-kitted engines have tailpipe extensions with noise suppressors in there. And so all this stuff here was in the way. We had to do a little midnight grinding, and eventually we had to hang the engines outside. The center engine is hung with a bootstrap from the airplane itself. And this is an example that I really should tell you. We worked all day Saturday trying to install this engine. The front end of the engine is attached to the airplane with a little transition duct, about a 5-inch long transition duct. Has a bolt circle at the front that attaches to the bottom of the air S duct that brings the air into the engine, and the backside has a bolt circle that attaches to the inlet compressor case flange on the engine. We attached the transition duct to the engine, couldn't spend all day fooling around with this. Ding, bing, bing, I go home and I put this down. Sunday morning, we were working 12-hour shifts, by the way, 6 days a week. Sundays were a day off. Sunday morning, I get an email from a guy named Ron in San Antonio, Texas, who I don't even know his last name. He says, "You're doing it wrong. Here's what to do. Drop the engine, take the transition duct, attach the engine, then bring it back up, then attach that whole thing to the airplane." So when I should know that, my first job at Boeing, I wrote the engine change procedures for the 727. Yeah, no kidding. But the little gray cells aren't what they used to be. In any event, and maybe, just maybe that had been, it's called out wrong all those years, who knows. But came in Monday morning, did it Ron's way, and it worked. Here's a case of Ron popped out of nowhere. We spent 8 or 10 hours fooling around with that engine trying to get it in place. The weather was terrible. We were in the nose dock most of the time. There's one of Boeing 787 Junkers. That's actually one they scrapped, number 5, I think it is. And just terrible weather. There's TC trying to see what the heck's going on in the nose dock. And, of course, the flight controls, there's David working on them. We had to get the flaps up to 15, and then we designed and manufactured a pair of locks. I won't get into all that stuff. So that we locked the flaps in flaps 15, and we spent quite a lot of time working on the anti-skid since we now had no reverse, and we wanted to stop the airplane. Before we fueled it, we had to weigh it. 727 is a tail-heavy airplane. Makes sense. The engines are in the back. So we put 5,000 pounds of ballast in the forward belly. We weighed it, jacked it twice on axle jacks. A lot faster and easier than when I used to do it by hand. The little machine there pops out like a tape in a Safeway store and gives you the weight. We had a pool. Everybody guessed on the weight. My guess was 95,000. The actual number was 95,580. That's with the ballast, so hold the applause. Fuel systems, the airplane is a 3-tank system, 2 wing tanks, and the center tank is comprised of 2, 3, 4, or 5 sections, 2 integral sections in the inboard wing, and then rubber bladder tanks in the center tank, in the center section bays, and you can have variable numbers of those. We decided that we would not, TC had scrounged 2 sets of those bladder cells. We decided we weren't going to install those for various reasons. One is which we couldn't find somebody to install it. It's another procedure and thing I used to do when I was a skinny kid at Boeing. The tank entry doors, you can see all of those there. We get into the tanks. We found we had some corrosion damage caused by microbial damage caused by microbes that live in the fuel water interface. You wouldn't think that the organism could live there, but they do. And even though it's in pitch black, and so there was a little bit of residual fuel in those tanks, you see, and where the water and the fuel met, the microbes had a field day, but we cleaned that out. This is all of the hardware that United had taken out, all those fuel tubes and the rest of that. Those all had to be installed, all in the center section, all in those fuel tanks, all through those little holes with some poor guy up in there. We did use those bladder cells. Here we are cutting out the fittings that we needed for the dimensional stack up. This was all done by an outfit called Triumph. Gary Williams, who I call Mr. Fuel Tank. Triumph does all the fuel cell work, fuel tank work in Everett and all over the country, actually. At the end of the day, they gave me a bill for $44,000, which I was prepared to pay, but I convinced them to tear it up, which they did. Finally, the day came, I called Terry Wilcoxon over at Castle and Cook. We pushed the airplane outside, and I said, send me a fuel truck with Jet A1. And so he did. And we got all set to put fuel on the airplane for the first time in 25 years. And you see all those yellow barrels around there? You know what they're for? We did a pressure test on the wings, on both wings, 5 psi positive pressure test. You can also do a negative pressure test. And we had a scheme. The scheme was we're going to add fuel to the right wing in 100-gallon increments until we had filled it up, and then we'd move it over to the other side. What we didn't want to do was to have, we have a leak. We weren't going to fill the whole wing with fuel and then have a big leak. So we started fueling the airplane. We got up to 222 gallons, and we had a fuel come pouring out one of the doors. So we had a backup plan. The backup plan was if we had a fuel leak, we were going to transfer all the fuel real quick, like over to the other wing. And we also had a bunch of access doors that TC had scrounged from everywhere. He's a scrounger right out of my own heart. And you can see some of the replacement doors there. When we went to do that, we had to pressurize this line here, and it blew the line. So we couldn't move the fuel to the other wing. So what we had to do was pump it out. So there's nothing more happy in your life than to pump 225 gallons of jet fuel at $3 a gallon into your airplane and then pump it out in 5 minutes later into a waste tank. But that's what comes with the territory. So now these fuel lines that blew, we found there's a Aero Controls down in Auburn, had a parts out airplane in Shelton that had they had these lines on. They had on this junker. So Jim Munike, did you stand up yet, Jim? Go ahead, big guy, stand up. He drove down, it was a crummy day, through Seattle traffic, Tacoma traffic, drives over to Shelton, liberates these hoses off of this junker airplane, drives back through those two cities, through all the things, gets them back up to Payne Field, and then we found that they were no good. He did it still smiling like he is now. It was a nice try, but we had to fabricate new ones. Finally, we got to the point where we could run the engines. And Denny Middlesworth, who is here, Denny, are you here today? He was another one of my finds. You know, we had a problem with the electrical system. We couldn't transfer from the essential bus to the standby bus. If anybody knows what I'm talking about. And bing, 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 Bob puts this all on the hot sheet, you see. 20 minutes later, I get a call from, and she's, you want me to go get my microphone, don't you? I can do that. Hello. 20 minutes later, I get a call from Maine, a guy named John Cashman, who used to be head of flight test. He's sitting there, maybe he's the guy who read my stuff 20 times a day, I don't know. But he's sitting there reading all this stuff. And he says, here's the name, Corporal Denny Middlesworth. He lives in Kirkland. Here's his phone number. I called up Denny. I have to tell you also beforehand that we went into the P6 panel. It's a panel behind the flight engineer. Got this standby bus transfer relay. We got out the wiring diagrams to figure out what's going wrong, why it wouldn't work. We had United wiring diagrams. We had FedEx wiring diagrams. they didn't agree with the airplane. They had like 8 wires coming out, and this one had 4 wires coming out. What are we going to do? That proves that this airplane was really the prototype airplane. I mean, it was unique. And so I called Denny, here's who I am and what I'm doing, all the rest of this. He says, I have the drawings for that airplane in my basement. He says, where are you? And tell me how to get there. So he came up the next morning with all this stuff. I have pictures of him picking over all this stuff. And so we were able to get the electrical system working. Now, in the case of the fire detection system, I go on and on about this. Obviously, we needed to have good fire detection and extinguishing. And there's a big problem because 727 has 2 vendors, Walter Kitty and Sistron Donner. And if they can't mix, you can't mix and match, And we had one engine that had one vendor, and the airplane was wired for the other vendor. And Dennis, after he got the first part fixed, he stuck around and acted as our flight engineer, and he was able to troubleshoot this down. And what it turned out is somebody, in the 25 years that airplane had sat at Payne Field, somebody had cut out 2 wires from a thick wiring bundle, about 8 feet long, and removed them from the airplane. And boy, finding that was a real bear cat. But here's a case where a guy showed up, Denny Middlesworth, and I wish he was here today, I really do. And so he's real happy that day because we're doing a fire test, and we're getting the bell and the 3 red lights on the fire. So we've taken the airplane out. We took it over to ATS's run-up pad, the only one at Payne Field. We had a really stiff tailwind. 727 doesn't like running with the tailwind, and especially the center engine. And we were getting some really bad compressor stalls. So I got permission to go out on the airfield, and I taxied the airplane, and you'll see that in the video in a minute. For the first time. It's the one where I showed a picture of my wife and TC sitting there. If you look here, you'll see, here we have an engine running for the first time. If I can get this going here and not poke my eye out. So the low oil pressure light is out. We have fuel flow and EGT. We have N1 and N2, and we have some EPR there. So we have an engine running for the first time in 25 years. And that one there I'll skip. United wanted to have a photo op with a brand new 787 that they just took delivery of. And then none of this could be done. My hat here says team, and believe me, it was a big team. And there's TC and a whole bunch of others. There's Steve in the back, Bruce Sutherland, who's also passed, Greg Clark, who was director of quality in Everett. There's Ward. There you are, Ward. Ward, the lawyer, in the lower right-hand corner. There's Denny, Doug King, and Lori Haig up in the front, who trusted me, more than they trusted Boeing. And of course, there was a lot of media stuff, and we made the Seattle Times front page in the weekend, above the fold, as they say. And we even made the front page in the Daily Mail over in London. Rising from the ashes, first ever 727, take to the skies once more after sitting in the museum for 25 years. Remember, I showed you the locomotive at the beginning, same deal, huh? 59 years for them, 25 years for us. So lots and lots of the local TV stations, whatever. I was going to get a union card from the Actors Union. Glenn Farley and Jim Dever, they even had an evening magazine, a whole episode filmed on the airplane. There's Jim, TC, and me. And of course, I'll go through this real fast, but for somebody who lives on the Olympic Peninsula and volunteers at the Museum of Flight, it's a problem. And I couldn't do it on my airplane. This is early morning on heading for Payne Field. That's what the route looks like. It's 12 minutes versus 3 hours. And my airplane, one of the few little airplanes like that, gets to hang out with the heavy metal. And this is going home. And this is home. Let's see, that's our house right there. Can't see it, but I can. ferry permit, DAR, airworthiness directives are mandatory changes and inspections required by the FAA. There are 274 outstanding against this airplane. We agreed with the FAA and the DAR beforehand that we would account for all of them from the time we took possession of the airplane, 1991, through 2016, and we did that. And at about 2 weeks before the end, they said, we want you to do all the ones from 1964 to 1991. I got real upset, sent a bunch of nasty emails, and said that would require us to believe that United was flying the airplane illegally for its whole career, because United had purged all the records for the airplane and we couldn't prove that these AD notes had been done, so we had to do them all. I found a guy down in Arizona who used to work for United. He did them all. He worked 3 days and 3 nights. We wound up with 3 that we couldn't take care of, and I went into the FAA and asked for a waiver on those. They refused, and so I sent a nasty email, and our FAA guy, the DAR, said, he sent me an email back with a big attachment. It was a PDF of all of the DARs. DAR stands for Designated Airworthiness Representative, a guy who acts on behalf of the FAA. And he said, here's a list of all the DARs, find yourself another boy. And so we kissed and made up. The one we had to worry about was looking for corrosion in the bilge. We had to pull the wing body fairings in the bottom. It was a big job. We estimated it would take 4 days to do it. We had the last flight scheduled already. We had a weather window, which was really constraining. In any event, we did it all in 1 day. And so here's Bruce, and he and I are still good friends. And here he is giving me the ferry permit. And actually, the airplane required 2 permits. I had to get a noise ferry permit waiver out of Washington, D.C., because the airplane was non-compliant. So let's see. How are you guys doing for time? You okay? Keep going. Just a couple of, you can't fly one of these airplanes without an FAA-approved flight manual on board. And that flight manual is normally portioned by, has a designated serial number. Can't just have a flight manual. You have to have a flight manual for that airplane. And it looks like this, actually. And if you go, this is my basement junkyard. I have four sets of airplane parts there, various models, 2737, and all kinds of parts. They need. Well, you need a fuel flow indicator. We need a NEPR indicator. We need this. We need that. Okay, give me this serial number. I go home. I go down. Just like everybody laughs at all my junk, but until they need something. And so if you look over here, you can see that there is, in fact, a something that looks like a flight manual. And there it is. It's from 1965. I got this flight manual, and I carried it around with me for 50 years. And I was a field rep, I'm talking about this. I carried this and all these manuals. I have manuals for all the different manufacturers, all Boeing airplanes. And I'm talking about New York and Montreal and Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Honolulu and Kirkland and Snohomish and Hansville and all over. I carried this lousy flight manual around with me. Why the hell would anybody be that dumb? Why would anybody want to carry it? Because you might need it someday, right? Okay, so I went down and I got my flight manual. I opened it up, and guess what? There it is. That's our airplane. It's the flight manual. I can tell you that this document does not exist anywhere else on planet Earth except my basement. I kept it for 50 years because someday I might need it. And someday came. You think I'm going to change my ways? Real quick, contributors couldn't have done this without FedEx. Not only did they give me an airplane, engines, but all parts support you can imagine, engineering. There were 5 cities that were supporting us. I call them up and I need something. I need a fire loop. I need this. Of course, they could move everything overnight, being FedEx, all no charge. Up she'd come. I talked to one guy. They didn't have 727s anymore. They had 175. They were all gone. I talked to one guy he says, I'll call you back in the parts room down in Memphis, Tennessee. He said, went in the back, way in the back. I found one that you need, So be up there in the morning. SOAR did the repair, did a great job. ATS and Everett did a great job. Triumph, I mentioned the fuel. United paid for the paint job. PPG gave us the paint. Aero Controls in Auburn gave us a ton of parts. Canon redid the cockpit seats that were all so bad that you saw. Alaska gave me all of the front end cockpit emergency stuff, smoke masks and goggles, walk around bottles. Southwest gave us a ton of stuff. 3.7 and 2.7 are very common. They gave us all kinds of fuel hardware, fuel pumps, shut-off valves, hydraulic stuff. So in Columbia Pacific over in Moses Lake, Jeff Ackridge over there he helped me tremendously on the 3.7 and the 2.7. Lots of people, Steve and TC, on and on and on. The guy up in the top middle is a guy named Irving Jensen, Sioux City, Iowa. Gave me about $5,000 for starters, and also all kinds of parts and hardware. Gave me the headsets that, remember, you kept calling me every day. We get these headsets out of the museum in Chicago. I said, hey, man, cool it. David Capodilupo. David made his first flight ever as a kid on Marcella when it flew for Eastern. He's the dean of the School of Business at MIT. He got a hold of me through my website, and he started coming out here once, twice, 3 times a year. And so he did that for many years. He sent me a message this morning saying he wished he could be here. And so, we had volunteers literally coming from all over. Denny that I mentioned, and of course the last flight, George Kennedy. George Kennedy is an actor who played a guy named Joe Petroni, and in the movie Airport, the whole Airport series, there was about 4 or 5 movies. The first one, you remember, he goes up, he pats the airplane, remember, says, thank you, Mr. Boeing. I don't know if you guys remember that or not. It was a no-nonsense thing. This is quite a moving thing for me, actually, but Jeff sent, and George Kennedy died the day before we made our flight, and he said, Joe Petroni died yesterday. Make him proud. Steve changing the wiper blades. The wipers didn't work, but we wanted new wiper blades anyway. There's Bruce bidding us good luck. We towed the airplane over to the Future of Flight where we had a departure ceremony. There's Tim. I already introduced you to Tim, I believe. We had hundreds, if not thousands, of people lining the fences at Payne Field and at Boeing Field. Water cannon salute on departure, and lined up on 16. That's Charlie Lyford's Aerostar was the photo plane. It was supposed to be Clay Lacy in a Jetstar, in a Learjet, but it went mechanical down in Van Nuys at the last minute. And so picture the airplane as it was. Mission Impossible. A lot of people, I swear there's very few people at the museum who thought this airplane would ever fly again. I don't think the people in the FAA thought it would fly again. I think some of us wondered about it, but we kept a stiff upper lip. There she is. She's flying. That's what it's all about, right there. If you, my talk I gave at the museum when we landed down here, I said, I could feel her shake her mane and swish her tail, and I knew that she was smiling. Flew down the Sound, 160 knots, 2,500 feet. 2,500 feet there. That's another one of the parts. What's the part number? Okay, here it is. Here's that altimeter now sitting in my living room. the one they had didn't work. I gave them mine, and then afterwards I swapped them back. Coming down Elliott Bay, past the stadiums, over Georgetown. Final, Mount Rainier came out just at the right time. 13 right in those days, 14 now. 15 flaps, high body angle, number 1 787 in the background. And this truly was its final landing. Show off. Beautiful landing, Tim. Couldn't feel a thing. Another water cannon salute. Looking at herself in the window with all the United people there, current and retired flight deck people, cabin attendants. There's Julie and Dot. Dot's having a good cry. She does at all my things. Flight crew, myself, Ralph Pascal, the flight engineer, Mike Scott, the co-pilot. They both live on the East Coast, and Tim, who lives in Montana. And these are all souls, and here's people coming on board. Behind everybody is a good woman, of course. I won't get in all this, but the next day we put it in the parking lot next to Connie, another one of my favorites. Both of those airplanes I'd worked on for 25 or 30 years, polished it up. You could shave in it when we got through. And if you went to the Boeing 100th birthday party and the curtains opened, there was our airplane sitting there. Put it on the north ramp for a couple of months with the Air Force One and the Connie. And then in November of 2016, moved it across the street into the pavilion, parked it next to RA001. And so there is the from rags to riches story of this number one historic airplane. And this will be shown in a video I'll show in a minute. If you want to see lots and lots and lots more stuff, you can, first of all, grab me afterwards, but also just Google my name. It'll take you to my website. And there's about 3 months of reading in there. And so I want to thank everybody for coming here today. I'm going to play a video now, so don't jump up and run out because the doors are locked. And just remember, my thought for today is negative Ghost Rider. The pattern is full. I want to point out also that TC has written an outstanding book that documents all this with lots of text and pictures, and you can get that on Amazon. And so with that, if everybody is still alive and awake, I am going to try and play a video.
That's at 20% fuel done.
Okay, fuel flow. That's a good fuel flow.
Fuel flow, looks good. 30, come up 35, release.
Okay, got pressure started out closed.
Thank you.
So about 350 on EDT.
Sir, 50% we're in idle. Let it warm up here.
Okay, we're going to let the engine idle for just a moment and let it warm up.
Today, Boeing's very first 727 taxied at Payne Field in Everett for the first time in a quarter century. This is the final stages of testing before the plane makes one last flight to its home at the Museum of Flight's main campus at Boeing Field. It was feared that the historic airplane would never fly again after United Airlines donated it back in 1991. The tentative plan is to fly it to Boeing Field on March 1st.
There's 90. There's 90. There's 100.
Number 2 worked good. Too close, spin that off. Rods are looking good. Full releases on the anti-skid. $3,000 feet to go, Jim.
Tim. 2,000.
How did the airspeed look?
Got 100 on this side.
Okay.
Yeah, I had like right about 90 when I came back on the power. I got to 100.
Okay, well, we didn't bust loose the number 2 fuel flow.
Yeah.
1,000 feet to go.
How far up did you get number 2?
Number 2, I got to 190.
Got to 190.
Yeah. In fact, it went up pretty high. It might have got to 2.0. The throttle on this a little bit, but it didn't burp, so it's okay.
Good. Well, both airspeeds looked okay.
Okay. Landing lights coming off. Transponder might want to keep that on. Okay, speed brakes are down.
Okay, after that.
And 727 is clear of the active at Alpha 10 going back to the inner ramp.
727, set the ground at 121.8.
121.8.
What was that, Delta 3 we came out on?
Delta 1.
It feels normal to the left. It's still real stiff to the right. You feel it?
Let's just stop here.
Yeah, ask if we can just hold here, do a couple of flight control checks.
Yeah, ground Boeing 727. Can we hold here? We need to do some flight control checks.
Radios and transponder.
Okay, we are set on the 121.8 for now.
Gear.
Down to 3
Start levers. Parking brake.
Set.
Rudder no run trim.
Green
No, we want to go out into position.
Interphone.
Take off on the runway.
It's a check.
And just hold briefly.
Fuel dipstick. We have 15,000 pounds total.
Hit the fire
Fuel boost pumps 1 and 3 are
We'd
on.
like to take that shot and then take off immediately.
Filter speed selectors checked, and they are all
We don't have any idea, but we're ready to go. So
all open.
we're ready for takeoff. It's just when he starts to move.
Hydraulic pressure, around 2 a.m., 1 be unchecked. Ramier door is closed. Engine bleeds are open. Pneumatic cart.
Got the air on?
Got the air cart.
Okay, checklist.
Alright, beacon.
It's on.
Start pressure, we have 32 pounds. Before start checklist complete.
Okay.
You're ready for
There goes one. Turn.
number 1.
Okay, when you
Starter valve open.
And 2 rotations.
Rotation.
Oil pressure's coming up.
Oil pressure lights out.
15 barely.
Tap it a little.
That's all we're gonna get. Fuel.
There it goes.
GT.
30. 35.
Let it get out.
Okay.
Flight controls.
Okay. Rudders. I'll check the
Tops are
rudders.
free.
Okay,
Get the bumps okay?
Yep. Deep
I'll
brake.
get the rudders.
Is that going to test? Top it up, see if we get a test out of that. Yeah, okay.
Stabilize the trim.
We got 4 left.
Flex.
15 with the yellow arrow.
Electrical panel set in the central limit 3, no lights. Auxiliary pressure 4 on. Elevator rudder lights are out. Venturi switch is in Venturi. Keeper bugs.
190.
Okay, 108 and the 127 is the V2 set.
127 and 160 I got for
Set
speed.
right, 190 on either. Set
Alright,
across.
takeoff briefing.
Okay, guys. Anything really abnormal before 100 knots? We'll stop on a runway, sort it out with the tower, and get that sorted out before we go anywhere. Anything up to that point, unless we lose an engine or on fire, we'll continue to the safety height, which is over 1,000 feet. Come back, land, go on 1/6. Okay, we're going to be making a right-hand turn out over the sound, with a left-hand turn southbound, 2,500 feet.
Got it.
Questions?
Nope.
001 uniform, trying to take off 16 right for the last time, and we'll talk to you before we change over to departure. We'd like to hold in position for a minute or so until we get the photo plane coming up behind us.
01 uniform, no problem. Departure, give us back.
Go ahead and brake release now.
Okay,
We're rolling.
1 uniform, 16 right, gonna take off for the last time.
Number 2 slope in. Go press the stall.
Set those. Good.
20 knots, bring it in. There you go.
What kind of speed are you got?
About 40.
Yeah, 130.
good. A lot of wind noise over here. I'm gonna go anyway.
Okay, altimeters.
You got a Boeing out there for you?
Turn right, heading on 130 is on the final approach.
177.75. Which you use?
120.6 today.
120.6, I think that says on the tower, Mike.
5701 uniform flight tower, runway 13 right, clear to land, wind 13010.
Dave, you got the seat right?
Just like the simulator. Yes, that's Bravo 9. See the fire trucks there.
So with you for the last time at Bravo 9, actually at Bravo 9, to the museum for its final resting place.
Following 700 uniform program, taxi to Park and View, Bravo.
I do. Thank you for the help.
After landing check.
Please put up in.
Thank you.
That'll enjoy. What's that? Good job, Tim.
Yeah, I'll say.
Grease job.
I take back everything I ever said about you, Tim.
Okay?
Got it?
Okay.
Got power. Number 3
Last
down.
shutdown.
Shutdown checklist.
Last shutdown forever.
She endures. She will slumber contentedly in the new pavilion. The miracle of flight still resides in her graceful wings, and in her body an airplane's heart beats still.
Heck of a story. And so I'd like to thank everybody again for coming out here and spending time with me and us to hear this great story this afternoon. I want to especially invite everybody to cross the Sky Bridge, if you haven't already, and visit E1 in her honored and hallowed place across the street in the pavilion, even if you've seen her before. Maybe now you'll have a newfound appreciation for her great history, and especially you will become one of her ghosts. Close your eyes and you can see Lou Wallach sitting in the left seat, Bill Allen standing alongside her with a big smile, and maybe even the 3 million people she carried proudly and safely. She has lots of ghosts, and she has room for many more. For as we humans passed through her life, if I can find this, she watches and she endures. Thanks very much for coming. They've told me that they want the room for the next show. Possession is 9/10 of the law, so they're out of luck. But beyond that, I'll be standing outside, and we can do whatever Q&A you want to do out there. Thanks very much.